4 years, Margaret Lawson believed she had found her happily ever after. At 52, she was a best-selling author living in a charming brownstone in Charleston, South Carolina, with her husband, Thomas, an experienced financial advisor whose warm voice had once been her greatest comfort. He brewed her morning coffee just the way she liked it and ended each day with a forehead kiss and the words, "You are my whole world." But one night that illusion shattered. Margaret awoke close to midnight to find their bed empty. Assuming Thomas had gone to the kitchen, she turned over until she heard his voice drifting from the home office downstairs. His words were sharp, calculated. "She still doesn't suspect a thing, almost done." Margaret froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She crept toward the hallway and pressed herself against the wall near the office door, where light spilled through the crack. She didn't need to hear more. She knew something was deeply wrong. When Thomas returned to bed minutes later, his calm demeanor chilled her. That night she didn't sleep. And by morning, she no longer looked at her husband with trust, but with clarity. What had once been devotion was now suspicion. And as she stood in front of the coffee maker, Margaret knew her life was about to change. The next morning, Margaret stood in the kitchen with trembling hands, staring blankly at the coffee brewing, just as Thomas had made it for years. Only this time, she couldn't bring herself to take a sip. Her mind reeled with the memory of his late-night whispers. It wasn't a bad dream. It wasn't paranoia. It was real. For the first time in their 20-year marriage, she picked up her phone and opened the banking app. Thomas had always managed their finances. He was meticulous, almost obsessively so, with bills, investments, retirement accounts, and even her book royalties. She trusted him without question. That morning, the screen revealed why that trust had been a mistake. Transaction after transaction scrolled past her eyes. $600 here, $1,200 there. Dozens of withdrawals in the past few months. Nothing outrageous on its own, but together they formed a pattern. A quiet draining of their shared life. Her heart sank. This wasn't some forgotten investment. This was a calculated move. Just then, Thomas walked in, casually rubbing his neck. "Checking the account this early?" he asked with a forced smile. Margaret played it cool. "Just curious. Some of the charges looked odd." He poured coffee and shrugged. "Oh, probably just small investments. I meant to tell you." But he didn't meet her eyes. That was the moment Margaret knew. The man she had shared her life with was not just hiding something. He was hiding everything. Over the next 2 days, she watched him more closely. He was always on his phone, always flipping it face down the moment she came near. He stepped out to take calls, always with the same line, "Just work." But Margaret wasn't convinced anymore. His rehearsed calm, his subtle deflections, his too smooth charm, it was all a mask. Then came the slip-up. It was a quiet Tuesday night. After dinner, Thomas said he was going to shower, and for the first time, he left his phone on the dining table. Margaret hesitated. The water upstairs started running. She waited. 30 seconds, a minute. Then she grabbed the phone. It was unlocked. Her hands shook as she scrolled through his recent messages. Most were mundane, work reminders and messages from colleagues. But then she saw it, an unnamed number, no contacts saved. The latest message chilled her to the bone. "Send her the Meridian files. Just make sure she stays in the dark." Almost done. She read it twice, then again. Her had to be Margaret. And the Meridian files. What was he planning? She gently returned the phone to its spot, splashed water on her face, and tried to steady her breath. Thomas came downstairs minutes later, smiling like everything was normal. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "You okay?" Margaret nodded, but inside she was screaming. The next morning, when he left for work, Margaret made a call that would change everything. Her old college friend, Susan Lane, now a respected estate attorney in Savannah, picked up on the second ring. Margaret didn't waste time. She told Susan everything, the late-night whispers, the secret transactions, the ominous text. "How much are we talking?" Susan asked. Margaret swallowed hard. "Close to 500 million. There was a pause. Then Susan said firmly, "We're going to protect every dollar." Margaret wasn't just waking up from a lie. She was preparing for a war. And this time she wouldn't be caught off guard again. 2 days after that call with Susan, Margaret found herself seated at her dining table with a pen in one hand and a folder of legal documents in the other. The gravity of what she was about to do didn't fully hit her until she saw her name printed at the top of the trust papers. Her name, not theirs. For the first time in decades, everything was going to be under her control. Susan had acted with the precision of a surgeon. Within 72 hours, she had assembled a team of specialists, financial advisors, legal clerks, and asset protection consultants. They moved quickly. The apartment title was transferred into a personal trust. Every investment account Margaret had, including the royalties from her best-selling memoirs and the retirement fund she had quietly grown, were locked behind layers of legal fortification. It wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming agency. When Thomas returned home 3 days later, carrying a bag of takeout and flashing his usual disarming smile, Margaret was ready. She smiled back, took the food, and thanked him. He had no idea that every dollar he thought he would claim in a divorce settlement was already gone. Legally untouchable. Then, on a quiet Friday evening, Thomas finally made his move. He came home earlier than usual, wearing one of his expensive charcoal suits. His voice was steady as he set a folder in front of her. "We need to talk," he said, sliding the papers across the table. Margaret opened the folder slowly. Divorce papers. His tone was controlled, almost rehearsed. "I think it's for the best," he said, trying to sound gentle. "We've drifted apart. I just don't want this to get messy." She looked up, face unreadable, and calmly pushed the folder back toward him. "Before we go any further," she said, "there's something you should know." He blinked. "What is it?" She leaned forward, her voice quiet but resolute. "I've already moved everything. The apartment, the investments, my royalties, they're all in a protected trust now. You can't touch a cent." Thomas froze. His jaw clenched. "You can't do that." "I already did," she replied. "You don't get to betray me and walk away with half of my life." For a moment, silence filled the room like a fog. Then, voice cold and bitter, he growled, "We'll see each other in court." Margaret stood up. "But, why?" He stormed out, and for the first time in years, she felt her lungs expand. The house hadn't changed, but the air felt different. Lighter. Freer. She had taken back what was hers, not just financially, but emotionally. That night, she sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the city lights flicker. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She simply let herself feel the quiet satisfaction of outsmarting the man who thought she would stay blind. And deep down she knew. The battle wasn't over yet. But she had just won the first war. 3 days after Thomas stormed out of the apartment, Margaret began noticing something strange at work. Colleagues who usually greeted her with warmth now exchanged hushed glances and stiff nods. At first, she dismissed it as office tension or simple coincidence. But the silence grew heavier with each passing hour, until her assistant, Rachel, stepped into her office, face pale, holding a printed screenshot. "I think you need to see this," she said. It was a post from an anonymous online forum. The headline read, "CFO hides funds during divorce using company money." The post accused an unnamed executive of embezzling millions to shield assets from a pending divorce. In the comment thread below, someone added just one chilling sentence, "It's Margaret Ellis. Look into her." Margaret's heart sank. She didn't need proof to know who was behind it. His charm had faded, and this was his next weapon. Reputation. "He's trying to ruin me," she whispered. Rachel nodded solemnly. "And if this spreads?" Margaret didn't let her finish. She stood up, grabbed her coat, and drove straight to Susan's office. The fire in her chest wasn't just fear. It was fury. "This is no longer about our marriage," she told Susan, slamming the printout on the table. "He's coming for my name, my career, everything." Susan's eyes narrowed. "Then we play offense. First a cease and desist." If he doesn't back down, we sue, for defamation and reputational damage. That week, Margaret saw a different version of herself in the mirror, one who didn't flinch at legal jargon or late-night calls. With Susan's team, she gathered internal company logs, email trails, and official transactions that cleared her name. Every accusation was countered with cold, hard truth. No embellishments, no shortcuts, just facts. But Thomas wasn't finished. 3 days later, Susan called again. He just filed a lawsuit, she said, accusing you of embezzling funds from your joint accounts. He's claiming fraud. Margaret felt the floor tilt beneath her. He's not doing it alone, Susan added. His co-plaintiff is someone named Elias Monroe. Margaret froze. That was the name from the text she saw on Thomas's phone, the man who said, "Make sure she stays in the dark." Elias, Susan explained, was a known fraudster. No convictions, but a history of forging documents and pushing legal gray zones. The papers they filed were packed with fake transactions, complete with forged signatures designed to resemble Margaret's. "We have to prove this is all fabricated," Susan said. Margaret didn't sleep much that week. Every waking hour was spent gathering financial records, matching her real signatures to the forged ones, and working with a forensic expert who dissected every claim Elias made. Slowly, piece by piece, the lies unraveled. The dates didn't match. The signatures were inconsistent. There was no digital trail between Margaret and the fraudulent transfers. She had been pushed to a wall. But now she had the evidence to strike back. And as she prepared for court, she no longer felt like a woman scorned. She felt like a woman ready to win. Margaret Ellis sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, dressed in navy blue with her shoulders squared and her gaze unwavering. Beside her was Susan Caldwell, her longtime friend turned legal powerhouse. Across the courtroom sat Thomas, the man she once shared dreams with, now hollowed by arrogance and denial. He looked thinner than before, his jaw clenched, his hands twitching slightly against the folder of fraudulent documents he had tried to weaponize. The courtroom buzzed softly as the judge entered and called the case. What followed was a systematic dismantling of Thomas's narrative. Susan presented document after document, financial records that proved the timeline of Margaret's asset transfer, authenticated copies of real versus forged signatures, and forensic analyses showing no link between Margaret and the fraudulent co-plaintiff, Elias Monroe. Margaret didn't flinch when Elias's name was read aloud, because he never showed up. The fraudster's absence only cemented the truth. This had been an elaborate setup from the start. When the judge finally delivered the ruling, Margaret didn't cry or smile. She simply closed her eyes for a moment. Not in triumph but in peace. Thomas's entire case was dismissed. The judge ruled that Margaret's trust was legally sound and protected. Worse for him, his defamation tactics backfired. He was ordered to pay for all of Margaret's legal fees. No settlements, no negotiations, just consequences. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Thomas approached her with a look that had once melted her. Now it made her steelier. "You didn't have to do this," he muttered. Margaret met his eyes squarely. "No, Thomas, you didn't have to do this." And then she walked away, not as the wife he tried to deceive, but as the woman he underestimated. In the weeks that followed, Margaret didn't post on social media. She didn't host victory dinners or go on a vacation to celebrate. Instead, she returned to the rhythms that had always grounded her. Writing quietly in her study, walking through Central Park in the early mornings, sipping coffee with the sun on her face. But something had changed. The fear was gone. So was the illusion. She realized that strength isn't always about fighting back with fury. Sometimes it's about defending your life with clarity, truth, and calm. She didn't rebuild with rage. She rebuilt with grace. And when friends and colleagues asked how she made it through such a storm, she simply said, "Know your worth. Protect what's yours. And never let love blind you to the need for boundaries." Because in the end, Margaret didn't just protect her fortune. She reclaimed her freedom. Margaret Ellis once believed in love with her whole heart. She had trusted Thomas, the man who shared her bed, her secrets, and the chapters of her best-selling novels. But that trust, once the foundation of their marriage, had turned into a trap. He didn't just plan to leave her. He schemed to take everything she had built with quiet, methodical deception. And when she uncovered it, she didn't fall apart. It arose. Justice came slowly, but it came with undeniable clarity. In the courtroom, Margaret stood her ground. Armed with airtight legal documents, forensic evidence, and the sharp advocacy of her attorney and longtime friend, Susan Caldwell, she watched the lies collapse under the weight of truth. Her $500 million estate, once in jeopardy, was declared untouchable. Thomas's lawsuit was dismissed. His attempts at defamation failed. He left the courtroom not with half her life, but with a court order to pay her legal fees. But for Margaret, that day marked more than just a legal victory. It was a spiritual turning point. She didn't vanish into luxury or celebrate with champagne. She chose something quieter, something stronger. Margaret began to speak, not for attention but for impact. She started sharing her story with women's circles, legal panels, and financial literacy workshops. Not everyone she met had a fortune to protect, but all of them had something to lose if they gave trust too freely or allowed fear to silence their instincts. She also reached out to younger women, mentoring interns, guiding rising authors, and helping others understand what she had almost learned too late. Independence is not selfish, and protection is not paranoia. Among them was Grace, a young paralegal who reminded Margaret of herself 2 decades ago. Bright-eyed, kind-hearted, and too quick to believe that love was always safe. Through that mentorship, Margaret felt something return. Not revenge, not even justice, but purpose. It would have been easy to grow bitter, to retreat, to let the betrayal define her. But she didn't. She chose instead to be a lighthouse. A woman who survived the storm and stood tall so others could find their way. Because in the end, Margaret realized that the true measure of strength isn't how loud you roar in court, but how quietly you rebuild what someone tried to destroy. She didn't just protect her wealth. She reclaimed her life. And in doing so, she sent a message to every woman watching. Your power isn't in what you own. It's in what you refuse to surrender. There's a unique kind of heartbreak that comes not with raised voices or slammed doors, but with whispered lies in the dark. For Margaret Ellis, the woman once known for her warmth and open-hearted devotion, betrayal didn't arrive like a storm. It unfolded in silence. Stealthy, sharp, and meticulously planned. The man she trusted most, her husband of over a decade, had looked her in the eyes every night while quietly plotting to dismantle her life. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a betrayal of intimacy at its deepest level. When Margaret overheard him speaking in hushed tones about keeping her in the dark, her world didn't crumble, froze. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. She didn't panic. She didn't confront. She observed. She waited. And then she acted. What saved Margaret wasn't rage or revenge. It was instinct. That quiet voice every woman has but sometimes doubts. The same voice that told her to check the bank accounts she had once left entirely in his hands. The same voice that whispered, "He's not who he says he is." And when her suspicions became certainty, she did what few would expect. She moved first. But Margaret's story isn't just about legal victories or financial safeguards. It's about transformation. The journey from being someone's target to becoming her own protector. She didn't let fear paralyze her. She let it instruct her. And that instruction led to strength. This was the woman who once started every day with a forehead kiss and a cup of coffee made just the way she liked it. She had built a life on love, loyalty, and belief in the goodness of people. But when betrayal knocked, she met it not with bitterness, but with clarity. In the aftermath, Margaret didn't just rebuild her financial fortress. She rebuilt her sense of self. She found new purpose in mentoring others, especially women who had felt the sting of betrayal or had placed blind trust in others. She turned her experience into advocacy, teaching that emotional survival is just as vital as legal protection. And through it all, she discovered a power far greater than money or reputation. The power of truth. Her message to others is simple but profound. You don't have to become hard to be strong. You don't have to hate to heal. You just have to recognize your worth and stop giving pieces of yourself to people who only come to take. Margaret's transformation wasn't loud. It didn't come with fireworks or applause. It came with deep breaths, quiet courage, and the decision to no longer live in the dark. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is not to fight, but to walk away with her dignity intact, her legacy protected, and her story told on her own terms. When Margaret Ellis overheard her husband plotting her downfall late one night, something inside her broke, but not in the way he expected. For years she had been the devoted wife, the woman who believed in love, loyalty, and shared dreams. But in that quiet moment outside his office door, Margaret realized the man she trusted most was preparing to strip her of everything she had built. She didn't confront him. She didn't cry. She took a breath and began planning. With the help of an old college friend, she legally moved her $500 million fortune into a protected trust. She stayed silent, watched carefully, and waited. When the day came and he slid the divorce papers across the table, Margaret didn't flinch. She calmly revealed the truth. She had already moved everything. But it didn't stop there. When her husband retaliated by smearing her name and launching legal attacks, Margaret stood firm. She fought with evidence, with truth, with resilience. And in the end, justice was served, not through revenge, but through the quiet power of preparation, integrity, and unwavering strength. Life will test you, often in the silence between betrayals and revelations. But your power lies not in how loud you react. It's in how clearly you act. Never hand over your future blindly, no matter how much you love someone. Because trust is a gift. Protection is a responsibility. And the truth, when you stand by it, will always be your greatest defense. If Margaret's story touched your heart or reminded you of your own silent strength, leave a comment below. We want to hear from you. And if you believe in stories that empower and heal, hit that subscribe button. Your support keeps these voices alive.